Now this week, research from the National Australia Bank revealed that 1 in 5 Australians quit their job within the last year.
Well, to unpack this particular data and what it means in terms of trends, we're joined now by Rhonda Brighton-Hall, the CEO of Moi, that's making work absolutely human, and Alison Pennington, Senior Economist at the Centre for Future Work with the Australia Institute. Thank you so much for both of you getting up this early on a Sunday morning to talk to us about the future of work and where we're going with our lives. Alison, I want to start with you first. Now, this is one survey that says 1 in 5 Australians are quitting their jobs. One survey from one bank. Does it reflect a national trend?
Well, yeah, I think the survey data that's being presented by NAB isn't really reflected in our more reputable public sources of data like the ABS. Through the pandemic, it's been a story that's really animated people, the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle, in the words of Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. But actually, even if we look at the statistic of 1 in 5 workers changing jobs within a year, it's actually largely consistent and very normal in any labour market for people to move around that often. In February, before the pandemic started, February 2021, so we're into the pandemic at that point. The latest data we have is around 24% of all employment people had either left jobs, lost them, or had been working multiple jobs. So I think we have to start off by saying movement in the labour market is very normal. But I think what the study is pointing to is some broader questions around the quality of jobs and people's experience of work and the burnout. And these are matters that are really worth in drilling down to.
Yeah, because Rhonda, while movement within the workforce is normal, over the last couple of years we've had so much disruption and so much change to our working lives. That has to have an impact.
Because we work inside the society and the community that we live in, and the society and community we're living in, the world, went through an amazing situation, a pandemic we had never experienced in our lifetime, and it has enormous pressures on people, and inside that life pressure, we then had our working jobs as well. And I agree with Alison. I think the stats are basically people do move around a lot. We use ABS data and the official stuff from the US as well, as opposed to small surveys. And the reality is we sort of didn't resign as often as we used to in 2020. We resigned a little bit more in 2021, but only sort of, if you average them out, probably about the same as it normally is. But the biggest situation is that there's a big change in the sorts of jobs people do and the sorts of jobs we want to do. And I think that's a much more interesting conversation that we could have as a community, as a society.
What are the more interesting jobs that people want to do, Rhonda?
Well, I think we started talking about the fact that tech would be a really, really important part of our industry, but we didn't do a lot for training and what we would do about that. We knew that our population was getting older. I remember in just early 2000s, we started talking about that we would hit a position in our society where caring jobs would become incredibly important. And the year that they gave us at that time was 2011, when our population would be old and we'd need more people in caring roles. We'd need more nurses and doctors, would all live longer. And yet we didn't put great boosts of training into those areas either. And then they're the areas, of course, that no one could have predicted the pandemic, but have been very hard hit. And even if you go back, referring to NAB, they sort of announced, I think it was 2015, they said, we're going to have all these new tech jobs. And the tech industry came out and said, you can't, because there isn't any people to employ in those jobs. So these have been issues that we've known for a long time. And now we're talking about them as if they just happened, but they didn't just happen. We really needed to be rethinking training probably for a decade or two. And now we're going to have to do it much faster. But there's some great ideas coming through too, so I don't want to be pessimistic about it either.
And Alison, do you think, though, that the pandemic has essentially changed or shifted the employee-employer relationship? It's no longer a one-size-fits-all. You can't do that anymore.
I think what's happening in this discussion is the experience of a particular segment of the labour market, predominantly professional, well-paid employees, are projecting a story onto what's happening more broadly. As we've discussed, the data doesn't reflect large volumes of movement and large intentions to leave bad jobs. And what this this gets to is it's a very individualistic conversation. The idea is it's on the individual worker to leave terrible conditions. But then what does this discussion mean for the aged care workforce? What does it mean for people who love their work, do very socially important work, but for which they are held in a straitjacket and unable to come together meaningfully to ask for a higher wage, whether it's government in this case that is underfunding the institutions and not allowing those necessary wage increases. So it means that I think, and I'm glad Rhonda brought up skills, because it's one of the most important institutions alongside higher unemployment payments, alongside a collective bargaining system, alongside accessible, ideally free early childhood care and education. Yeah. These are just some of the institutions that work as a fabric and an infrastructure to support workers to be able to transition between jobs to get new skills that they need. But at this point in time, lots of these have been privatised within an inch of their life, and the high cost of accessing them means that it's not a meaningful experience for workers to really pick themselves up and leave bad conditions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And Alison, you pointed it is now up to the individual to get their own satisfaction out of their jobs as well. Rhonda, we used to see someone staying in a particular job or with a particular company for a lifespan, basically. There used to be loyalty to your work, to your employers. We don't see that anymore. Why not?
Oh, I think people have got a very good lesson in the fact that people aren't going to be naturally looked after by an employer for their whole working life. And so people have now been quite proactive in the understanding that they're going to have to start to look after themselves. And I would suggest, as Alison just suggested, looking after their colleagues as well. So it's not, I'll look after me and I'm okay, but actually an understanding that we will need to look after ourselves collectively as well. And I think last week I saw a really interesting sort of situation when the nurses went on strike. And I had a number of clients, of people that I work with, who said that they were offering their team, saying, if you would like to support the nurses and go with them, please do. Now, that's a very collective attitude. That's not even from companies that are in that industry, or even government that are in that industry. That's different. That's really people thinking about what sort of work do we want? How do we want the workforce to work? How do we want work to work for us? Yeah. And I think it's becoming a bigger conversation that people are stepping into, as opposed to, just a battle.
Listen, it's a conversation we could carry on talking about, which, and you both have contributed such wonderful insights to it too. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views with us, Alison Pennington there and Rhonda Brighton-Hall. Thank you.
Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.